In a world full of demonic creatures, the story begins at the king's castle demon. The Vermouth hero and his 4 other companions went to defeat their final enemy. Of the 5 demons, he had already beaten 3. There were then only 2 left. During this assault, they quickly found surrounded by creatures, but used their skills to get rid of it. The group of adventurers is composed from Moss Green, the big one, a powerful swordsman. Then there is Sienna, the magician, Anise, Saint Molan, the valorous, and finally Amel the idiot. This one has always been jealous of Vermouth that he considered like his rival, while they are satisfied with their new triumph. Amel noticed a directed attack on foam glass during its second of inattention and succeeds to intercept it with his own body. This one started to spit blood and collapsed on the ground. The demon responsible for the attack laughed and attacked again. But this time, Vermouth dodged without problem and cut down his enemy in one blow. His companions rushed towards Amel, who was lying on the ground towards. Moose still didn't arrive to understand the sacrifice of his comrade, but he was happy to have an honorable death. He then drew on his last strength to ask the great hero to kill the Demon King. He immediately accepted, swearing on his title. He then complimented all his companions, finishing with Sienna, for which he will confess his feelings. We then see a young boy stomp on a book while shouting that this was not the case. He then began to insult the author of the book, especially to have it named idiot, while his comrades both have 2 words about us. He was angry to see that the 4 members of his group have done nothing to change the content of the book, which shames him. But on the other hand, he can't blame them so as not to know that he was going to be reincarnated with one's past memories. This little boy is none other than Abel, the adventurer who died 300 years ago during the subjugation of demons. And on top of that, he was reincarnated as a descendant of the hero Vermouth, named Eugene Leanheart, aged 13 during his previous life. Vermouth had many concubines, he who was not the type to think about it. This must have changed with age. The main line of Vermouth includes the descendants of his wives, while the one of which Eugene is part is a secondary branch, although it also has the name Leonard. Before a succession ceremony, no members of secondary branches was not authorized to use real swords nor to train their mana. During all this time, he was forced to train with a common wooden sword, but it will end today. He then began to beat a training dummy, until it breaks completely under the terrified gaze of his father. It's far from the first kick-ass, and his body is really not normal for his age, so he would probably lose in combat against him with his bare hands. Although Eugene is his son, but scares him quite a bit at times, the look of her child does not have a hint of naivety. Eugene began to blame skills of the blacksmith and believes that he better bring him here and beat him for such a defective product. His father changed the subject, talking about the succession ceremony which will take place the next day. This one takes place once every 10 years and our protagonist considers her stupid. During this time, the main lines and secondary of the family face each other directly by bringing together all children aged 10 to 15. They will face each other in order to be able to compare their skills and decide worthy heirs of the family. While the main line was allowed to train all this time and develop their mana, this is clearly an attempt to prevent the secondary lineage to take the place of the principal by controlling new generations. His father recognizes his talent so much that he doesn't know if he is truly her child. He doesn't even dare to imagine its power if he was born in the main branch. He would rather have preferred may his son be weak like him, so that he does not have his ambitions shattered during his ceremony in which his father had a bad experience in the past. He then asked her not to compete the main family which he will not be able to face, no matter how talented he is, because they were able to lead in better conditions all this time. Eugene reassures him by affirming that he won't, but he thinks everything otherwise. Test your skills against 10-year-old children even seems almost boring to him. He went to clear his mind by breaking our battle dummy, impatient to see his opponents. The day after, he left in a carriage and took the time, during his journey, to reflect on his past life. When he bore the name Hamel, he thought he was a genius. He never had a problem to learn things from his youngest age and had a growth rate much faster than the others. But this vision was destroyed when he met Vermouth, who appears before him like a true genius. He mastered the sword and magic at its highest potential, so much so that he was nicknamed the God of War. The master of all, Vermouth was a duke in his country and was considered a hero until his death. Sienna, for her part, was invited to the kingdom of Ross and elected as the youngest witch head of the magic tower. Saint Anise wrote teachings which still exist today. And finally, the brave Melon seems to have created its own kingdom despite his stupidity. All of Eugene's former comrades were considered like geniuses and have all had a happy life until their end. But then why is the Demon King still alive? The Vermouth promise was just empty words. It seems that despite this, the demon was still imprisoned, what allowed peace to last for 300 years. While John was immersed in his thoughts, he was interrupted by Sir Golden, which made him notice his nervousness. In reality, our protagonist didn't care compared to his questions turning to ridicule. Well, the last of his thoughts. Once they returned in the territory of the lion's heart, the men accompanying him began to boast of the grandeur of his lands, although they do not belong to him, not even. Eugene very quickly defined his character and will avoid conversations useless for the rest of the trip until reaching your destination. Since our hero belongs to the secondary branch, he did not have the right at a welcome ceremony. It turns out that only the main branch has the right to wear the lion emblem on their left pectoral. Eugene asked if others have already arrived, but it seems to be the first, and was then led to the guest house. He was welcomed by Nina, who was assigned as a personal servant. She seems quite young to him, so he asks her age. It turns out that she is 16 years old and comes just finished his training. Eugene thinks this was intentional to discipline him, and if he dares to scold her for his mistakes, he then asks the moment when his loved ones will arrive. They will be there in 4 days at the latest. Following this response, Eugene wishes directly see the training center, much to the surprise of the servant. In another corner of the castle, sheltered looks, 2 individuals wearing the coat of arms of the main family were talking about Eugene, who has just arrived with the same age that the boy made fun of his origins, lost in the depths of the countryside. He then says that his carriage are probably bad and that he should be held accountable. His little sister named Seal advised him to go and punish him. He then carries towards his direction, under the gaze of another child, a few windows higher, the girl who noticed his presence, giving him a terrifying look that made him hide behind the curtains immediately. Meanwhile, Eugene trains to the spear in a rigorous manner, so much so that he looks like a soldier during his previous life. As Hamel, he always trained tirelessly, but after his reincarnation, he pushed his body to the limits. The body of Vermit's descendants turns out to be much more incredible than he thought. He continues to perform series of attacks under the amazed gaze of her servant, who didn't understand what he was like, able to move in such a way with sandbags on his arms and his spear. But she was interrupted by the 2 children of the main branch, young Master Simon and the young lady. Yes, we asked for an innovation, and when we are as much as I was doing, he answered in place of his servant that he is moving with a spear while calling him an idiot that his sister points out to him. If we immediately got angry and ordered him to apologize. Something that young man did immediately to his great surprise. So he continued saying it wasn't sincere. Eugene answered him that they must be the same age. What is the use of bowing down? If they are friends. If we answered him that they are not equal and his sister called him back for the carriage, he immediately began to insinuate that he made it unfit with its countryside dirt. Eugene looked at his servant and asked her to go clean his carriage. He then continued to threaten him so that he do it himself by telling him that we do not refuse his orders, because it is his Lionheart. Eugene replied, then showing up to turn it in derision, thing which his sister did in turn. If we couldn't take it anymore. He then took out a sword and challenged Eugene to a duel. This made our protagonist laugh, who tells him that the word duel is not to be taken lightly. He doesn't want to apologize nor to fight. He has something else to do than listen to his gibberish. So if we are going to provoke him by telling him that he is afraid and that his lack of honor comes from his father. Eugene then began to remove his weights a year while accepting the duel. He asks her to throw away the handkerchief to start. Not only he carried weights on his arms, but his jacket also weighed a lot. Kian couldn't believe it. He thought he was wearing them just to make it interesting, but he was actually practicing with it while he removed the last weight from his spear. His opponent was no longer sure of himself. However, it was he who started the duel. If he backs down now, he will be mocked for the rest of his life. Especially if it is in front of his sister's eyes. He then threw the handkerchief. Eugene accepts and pierces him immediately in the astonished eyes of Seal, who managed to follow him with his gaze. Cyan was totally beaten and ended up collapsing to the ground in one fell swoop. Eugene won without a shadow of a doubt. If she then turns to the winner saying to him that he didn't win the match in an honorable manner. According to Eugene, there is nothing unfair. The duel has begun at the moment the handkerchief was thrown away. His opponent was only careless if she finally agreed for this point, but expresses suspicion for the fact that he has trained himself to use mana. He assures her that he didn't do it because this is forbidden in his branch. She still doesn't believe him. Without mana he couldn't move like this with weights. Additionally, she noticed the fact that even if his brother was not negligent, he could not have parried this blow. Eugene then began to smile, telling him that his eyes are not only a decoration. He will still compliment Kian for having instinctively jumped backwards to reduce impact. After all, he is lucky. Even though he behaves horribly, it remains a descendant of Vermouth. If we get up with difficulty calling him a coward, it seems they are not twins for nothing. Eugene tells him that as a descendant of the lion's heart, it is better that he accepts humbly his defeat. He also wonders if he would have no better to keep a low profile to avoid potential trouble later. A man in a suit intervenes, worried about the young master and stunned by the scene. This one doesn't have no lion emblem on his chest. He's probably a knight engaged by the main branch. If we immediately started to cry for losing to a peasant. The knight then examines Eugene before introducing himself. His name is Chance and his task is to guide young Master Kian. Eugene introduced himself in turn by stating its origins. The knight asked him so what happened. He explained that if we provoked her insulting him and his cowardly father, Sir Edward confirmed the reason to perform this duel as acceptable before inviting the young master to have his wounds treated. A few hours later, Eugene was eating in large quantities and was interrupted by his servant, bringing him information that he had asked. She announced to him that the arrival of all the other members will take place tomorrow, which signifies the start of the ceremony. Eugene headed then outward and looked at the sky. He is about to destroy the descendants of Vermouth, so he hopes that he won't be too angry with her. It's not like he wanted it neither, this damn reincarnation. During this time, in a luxurious room, explanations take place between Simon and his mother. The second main wife, Annie, aka. She ordered her son to come closer while pressing voluntarily at the sight of the shock upon learning that he was made beat in one shot. She then randomly asked if this child trained himself to use mana. He replied that he doesn't have a trace of it in his body. She turned to Sky and asks him to explain the fight to him. She told the details explaining that Jean was just way too fast, which quickly sealed the outcome of the duel. If we felt guilty and looked at his mother who immediately slapped him. His behavior, in addition to his defeat against Peasant, shames him. His son tried to apologize but his anger still wells up. She looked at the knight threatening him and ordering him to train Kian for more than this happens again. He complied and left with the child still in tears. Once they leave the room, she took the time to calm down. She looked at Seal and asked him to get closer to Eugene. If it were up to her, she would have already killed Eugene directly, but she would be the first suspect. She wishes as her daughter befriends with a pretty strong boy to beat her brother if she agrees. In all cases, she wanted to know more about him, which makes his mother smile. The next day, 3 children from the secondary branch have arrived, named Deacon, Hansons and Lewis. Eugene was training quietly when Nina told him the news and the head of the family also arrived. His servant was panicked because he had to change and wash quickly. But if he does that, he'll be late. You might as well go without changing. While everyone was waiting in front of the entrance. Eugene paying attention to those present, he noticed Simon's mother and Sky Annie. Ilias. But also the first wife Theognis with his main eldest son in inheritance law, Yod Lionheart. 2 men on horseback approached the entrance. The father of the family Gillet, Leonard, and his younger brother Gillen. His father approached Yod telling him that he enlarges it and asks him if his skills have also improved. To which he replied timidly, giving it a completely different expression. He then looked Zion and Heaven greeting them. Finally, he looked on children of the secondary line by inviting them to eat in order to discuss the ritual of succession. Once gathered at the table, the 2 last children of the secondary branch had arrived, named Gargoyle and D0, using warp gates. Would he be of higher esteem than his family? There was also a stranger which does not seem be part of the family. If she asked so who could it be, he immediately introduced himself as a low period of the Red Tower. It could even be the master of this tower, which immediately caused a reaction Eugene since he is a successor of his former comrade Sienna. There would be 2 rounds, the green and the red, and both consider Sienna like their great master. Eugene did not think that he could meet someone close to his former comrades in such a place. Gilad addressed Eugene saying that he heard the news concerning Zion, which gave his son a shiver. The protagonist confirms this fact as true, but adds that he does not hold grudges. The father says he says that because he won. But Eugene adds that losing would have the same outcome if he wasn't strong enough. So he just endures the shame. Gillet he smiles saying that he is better than his son. Before addressing him, he tells her that he doesn't not ashamed of his defeat, but he should restore his honor apologizing. After all, he was the one who insulted him. He then looks at Eugene and apologizes, but it was obvious that this was forced. The father of the family addressed back to Eugene apologizing of not knowing his father. This is understandable. His family is located in the middle of nowhere. He asks her if her father is the one who taught him combat. Eugene replied that this was the case, but only for the basics. He did everything else himself. Which was surprising for the other two of the secondary branch who had just heard the news. Gilad expresses then his impatience for the ceremony and a magnificent feast was served. Once the meal is finished, the head of the family speaks on the succession ceremony which he considers discriminatory with respect to the secondary branch. He explains that for him, the branch primary and secondary have no meaning and that they are all capable of proving that they are worthy of great vermouth. Eugene smiles thinking that this chef is much nicer than his former rival. Obedience intervenes subsequently by showing a maze map. They will enter from different places and will have to advance by kicking monsters until arriving in the center where the boss is when the boss is destroyed. The ceremony ends and points are awarded based on of everyone's contribution. Eugene asks so what the reward is. Gilad explained that he would give the choice a family treasure, what amazed our main character. A little later I had to walk alone in a hallway smiling. Anyway, it's like he's already won. So he thought about what he could choose up to what he finds himself in front of Gargoyle and Urza. He looks at him menacingly. He asked him if he really won the duel against Shaun. He nods and leaves without developing his point. What surprises them, he can't understand his behavior. As night fell, Eugene trained rigorously with the sword by chaining together rapid attacks while wearing sandbags on his arms and legs. While he was focused on his training, he noticed the presence of the two same people watching him. The tall boy finally approached. He takes off his shirt and contracts his muscles. Eugene looked at him, confused. This guy is an asshole. He explains that his family has special treatment for growth muscles without using mana and without side effects. He asks him if he is interested. Desira contradicts him saying that this product grows a beard, even for a girl. She then tells Eugene that she knows that he used a spear against Zion. So why is he training with a sword? Eugene tells him that he uses both. She threw him then a wooden spear telling him that she is a spear specialist and she wishes for a duel. Our protagonist is curious to see his skills, so he accepts. As he prepared to begin, Eugene asks why Gary is still here. He will judge the fight which must be fair. So much so that Young wonders if he is not the descendant of Malo. For her stupidity, Desiree don't think he's capable to use sword and spear at the same time, being very attached to his weapon. She hates people who find out about it half and takes it for granted. When Gary announces the start, Desire heads straight towards Eugene to have the initiative. But she was quickly surprised. Eugene has no openings. He provokes her telling him not to stay there. She is hesitant, but she has no choice. She tries to give him a first blow, but he was to adorn a second, but he was ready. She then began to chain attacks at full speed. But they are all the same one after the other. For Eugene, she remains quite talented, especially without Mona. She has great potential but is no match for him. He repels a final attack and asks her why she didn't fail to attack him even once. Embarrassed, she tells him to shut up. He is able to ward off anything while staying put. For her, it's insolence and she plans to punish him with an attack. She began to pepper him with blows, even if they are ready before going behind him to attack it on another flank. She is convinced that he won't be able to block that side. But instead, Eugene uses his foot to block his spear on the ground. She then tried to free it, but it was too late. Eugene pointed his spear at his face. He won. Following Eugene's victory against Desira, Gargoyle asks for our protagonist to join forces. Except it's evening and Eugene tries to sleep. He interrupts his sleep just to say that, but Gargoyle would like to hear his answer. Eugene reminds him that they will all enter the maze by different places. How could he give in? But Gargoyle answers saying that the destination is the same for everyone. The boss of the dungeon, he is convinced that if they will also help each other. Eugene therefore believes that he wants to kill the boss by teaming up. Gargoyle nods, but what's the point? Eugene is convinced that he can beat him alone. Desira tells him that he is sure of him. But on the other hand, it is true that he is very strong. She tells him that teaming up could really benefit them. Eugene asks him so why she wants to kill the boss. Desira explains to him that during all these years, the ceremony was never won through the secondary line, but she thinks that this year, at 3, they are very lucky to accomplish this feat. Does he not want to dethrone the lineage? Main. Eugene looked at them without saying a word. Meanwhile, second wife Annie. He looked there through the window. She thinks that the reason for the Liberian's arrival is to take Yod as a disciple. Since a young age, he always preferred study magic than fighting with a weapon. If he is accepted as a disciple, then he will have to be absent for a certain time. Seal and Cyan will continue to develop during this period. In other words, Iodine will surely give up to his position in the succession. She always considered the ceremony inheritance as a problem. These children constantly lived with the label to be born of the second wife, but their strength of mind allowed them to survive. She trembled at the thought, what if we were defeated by a simple child of the secondary line, but in the contrary, she sees this as an opportunity so they can fight. Otherwise, he is surely very strong. So she hopes that Jane will finish the maze first and he humiliates all lines this way. The defeat of Zion will be forgotten. 3 days later, the ceremony has begun. The children were all waiting in front of the inn getting ready to cast a spell. They all get some kind of balls of energy levitating in front of them. The instructor explains to them that they must now make their weapon. To do this, they just need to imagine it in their heads. Some seem to have difficulty, while if she directly manufactured a rapier very happy with the result, she began to chain attacks to test it before asking at the hostel what happens if she breaks it. He replied that it will never happen inside the maze, because everything comes from his magic. She then asked if it was possible to make an animal rather than a sword. He replied that it is possible to make a doll or even a golem, but a living creature is impossible. He asks her why it is impossible to create life. She replied that it is a taboo of magic. The creation of life should not be artificial. What amazes him, so inspired by this great mage, Gargoyle as for him, decides to create a large claymore. He says it was his favorite weapon at home, even if compared to before it is no longer made of wood. While Desire him admit that no one cares. She then created a spear if we have a sword. And it was the same for Iodine, even if he didn't seem happy with the result. As soon as we teach, the Lewis all three forged a sword and finally Eugene created a sword and a shield. She asks him what he will do, if he the meeting in the labyrinth, will he fight it? Eugene then asks Gilad if it's possible. He explains that as the competition is at the heart of the ceremony, fight and obviously allow. However, cooperation is also important. Mutual aid is essential to progress as a family which shares the name of the lion's heart. She then looked at Eugene and seemed to expect something from him. She enjoys smiling at him, although I don't find it unpleasant. Loriane asks if everyone has made their weapon before giving a pendant to everybody. This is a necklace connected to their consciousness. When great stress is felt, the collar will react, which will cause the instructor in case of danger. It is therefore a security mechanism. If ever they don't feel able to continue, all they have to do is touch the necklace shouting, "Help me." Now that the explanations are finished, now it's time to go home in the labyrinth. Even if they enter through the same door, they will appear in different places. They all head forward towards the portal with expressions very different from each other, moving from fear to confidence. She wishes Eugene good luck, but he responds selflessly before going through the gate. Once returned, he had a feeling of nostalgia in her former life as a Mel. He explored the labyrinths to the point of becoming ill. He examined the ceiling and slashed his sword into the void. The blade stops right in front of the wall. Space is limited. Those who took up arms with a long range will struggle. That is why he opted for the generic combination of the sword of the shield that can answer to most situations. Since this place was designed for children, the difficulty will surely be simple. He then moves forward confidently. During this time, we detected and appears to me and attacks idiots who struggles as best he can before to call for help using your collar, suddenly prepared to get him out of there. 1 hour had passed since the beginning of the ceremony and 3 people have already failed. I looked at them with disdain and told them to go and rest. He was completely devastated. Gilad and she observed then the remaining 6 participants. They first watch Gargoyles, who rushes towards goblins and prepares to decide. Unfortunately, his sword hangs on a pillar, which makes one of them laugh. But he used all his strength to break the wall and cut off their heads. In one try. He struck them down. He is clumsy, but moves forward with strength. He then observes Heroes, who advances cautiously with his spear and finds himself face to face with Slime. She uses her agility to dodge all attacks and pierce the last to chart his course. Slimes are complicated to kill without magic, so she looks for openings to escape. She is fast, both in her movements than in his decisions. She focuses on crossing the labyrinth by avoiding the fights, which for his part look at the walls carefully. His mother gave him a card of the labyrinth before the start of the ceremony, so he studied with her. He picks up a stone and throws it before him, what activates a trap before it can calmly continue on his way. He is too fearful, but that allows him to avoid bad situations. Meanwhile, if she was in front of a goblin, he tries to attack him, but she dodges it before turning around with a grace to pierce him with his rapier, who killed him instantly. She continues to move forward with confidence but finds himself facing a wall. If she uses her instincts, she moves quickly but often acts immaturely. He then watches it against a goblin. He threatens him with his sword, but this one was amazed to see everything that comes from magic around him. Suddenly he attacks and manages to parry the blows before cutting off his head. Then emerging victorious from the fight. The death of the monster caused the appearance small mysterious particles which he contemplated. Bayern noticed that he was interested in magic. Gillis. He tells her that it is since he was a baby. They already tried to invite magic teachers from the capital, but he refused to continue this route. She was curious to know why. So the father of the family says that magic is not valued in their lineage and he is put under pressure by his mother to be the next leader as the first in the order of succession. Jan says he understands. After all, magic there may be endless possibilities, but it's a path which is certainly difficult. But his father wants him follow the path of the arcane. After all, if he is still passionate, he surely won't be able to refuse the opportunity to become the disciple of the Master of the Red Tower. Lorien says that he can't promise anything, but he will still give him a patient test if its potential is insufficient. He will not hesitate to refuse. Gillett explains that he absolutely no intention of forcing him, but he wants everything just as his child can follow your dreams. He explains that instead of his own ancestor, Eliot worships Sienna. Hawthorne explains that he also agrees with this and that he also preferred the story of the wise woman who invented an extraordinary fate every time that he was in a weak position. Gillett explains that he also read this story several times when he was a child, but his favorite character is neither Senna nor Vermont. Curious then asks him who he preferred. He explains that his favorite and Lorien see that he turned his attention to something else. Gillett tells him to look. He pointed at the transmission from Genoa who faced an ogre. The young man looked at him expressionlessly. The man tried to hit him, but he saw him with his shield. Then his hand hits the ground. He immediately then jumped up and started to chain blows with speed absolutely astonishing. Both were speechless. Bayern asks him who is this boy, but I couldn't say anything. The only word that came to mind was unbelievable. The ogre collapsed behind him. He is Eugene Leonhardt. Eugene. Continue to advance like nothing ever happened. The two who just watched the scene didn't know how to interpret it. Gillett tells him he's incredible considering he is only 13 years old. He shouldn't have any experience of fight against the trolls, but he wasn't even afraid for a second. He simply neutralized the while that he absolutely broke the dungeon system. Basically, this troll was not created to fight. He was bigger than normal in order to force them to escape, and yet he killed him so easily. I read it, said it's a child, but he may simply have natural talents. And Ben looks at him asking him if he knows what children are called of that type. Geniuses, and that makes them think of one person. During this time, an ogre was about to strike by force with his sword, but he was repelled by it before managing to catch up. He was hurt everywhere with arrows stuck on his back, but he faced the terrifying ogre. With all his soul he began to brandish his sword and rush towards him. The ogre tried to hit the ground, but he dodged it at the last moment. He whirled then to cut off his leg, which made him collapse immediately so that he couldn't react in time. He uses his body as a springboard to propel themselves through the air. He sweats his body. He then shakes the sword in the wound, which makes the colossus roar in pain, and little by little his strength left him. Guy looked at his opponent's corpse and began to blush with all her might as a conqueror. The body of the colossus evaporated, which made him fall to the ground. This monster cut his muscles and broken ribs. He was really very strong. He suffered multiple traps and now, he must have been fighting something so terrifying. He very much doubts that the others will come out unharmed. Finally, he collapses to the ground, fainting from fatigue. If we found ourselves face to face with the monster. But he didn't look in his direction. He gets stressed seeing him. A middle-class monster shouldn't be there. He's willing to bet he doesn't not been placed here to be beaten. So he throws a stone somewhere else to divert his attention while the ogre watched at the point of impact. If we started to sprint while smiling, looking at the confused ogre. But while it was launched in his rush, he falls on his sister. Sky. They manage to find each other, which means that they are surely close to the center. If we explain to him that it is a good thing because by following him, she won't end up getting lost. Only a few days ago, he had been humiliated by Eugene. So this event and its luck to repair her reputation, if she called him telling him to ask everything that she wants in order to restore her honor. If she tells him that since the labyrinth is an illusion, it is possible to come across any what type of monster. If we ask him why she asks something so obvious, then if she tells him that it may be possible to meet ghosts, which made his blood run cold and he pretends to act as if nothing was. In front of his sister's amused look, he tells her not to worry and that her big brother will protect her. While a hand gradually appeared before him, it was a bloody face which made him scream instantly. Whereas if she smiled calmly in front of the stage, the two people were completely scared. It was Desira. If we asked him how dare she scare him so but told him that she was even more afraid. How can he create like this? If we ask him so why does she have all this blood and he is ready to bet that she wanted to attack him by surprise. But she tells him that she was simply injured by a trap without knowing it. If she had been right, she was disappointed because his ambush attempt failed. So she turned around and started walking in another direction. His sister told him that she is running away and that he must catch her if we are embarrassed. They are still made ridiculed in front of her. He doesn't count for forgiving mistakes and they both get together to pursue it. Heroes know she can never win in 2 against. So she desperately wonders where did Gariki go, but this one was still on the ground. Suddenly the ground began to crumble under his feet. It was a trap. She finally catches up at the last moment and manages to jump to land on the other side. Desira keep running as best she could if we started to think in front of the hole and said to himself that it is maybe best to shop around. But this is not possible. His sister is behind him. He can't again look like an idiot. He wanted to keep that until he meets the boss, but it seems he has no choice. He then began to use mana to run at full speed and jump. Once you arrive on the other side, he extends his partial hand telling her that he will catch her, but this one didn't have no need for his help, she just jumped without difficulty. To his great surprise, he caught himself saying he expected it before continuing their chase. And by continuing their game of tag and mouse, they end up finding each other in the boss's room. He looks at him, impressed. Eugene was resting quietly against a wall and asks them why they got here all three together. If we asked him what he was doing here, then Eugene replied that he was simply waiting to see who would arrive first if we hadn't completely understood what he wanted to say. And if she replied that the first no one who arrived here is him. Desiree was a little confused. At these words, she said to herself that he wanted maybe accept the proposal to fight as a team with Gariki. Eugene tells him that he remembers having had discussions like that, but that's not why. He decides to give way to them. After all, if he fights alone, he will beat him too easily. Wouldn't it be sad for all people who have made efforts to come here? Cyan was revolted by these words and Eugene told him that as long as they are at this distance, the boss doesn't seem to attack them. As a result, he tells them they are going to fight him in turn in their order of arrival longed for. Partial Punishment Hours was frightened by this idea. She never imagined fighting him alone. Eugene tells him that he sees that she was injured in the maze. She thinks she can't win and she can always give up. But faced with these words, it does not deflate. And good, from his injury, she then began to move forward cautiously towards the boss while the other two watched Eugene in a confused manner. If we ask him if he will also fight for being so arrogant, Eugene tells him that he is going to fight once everyone is finished. But if we tell him that his turn won't come, maybe not because it is he who will defeat him, then Eugene smiles and tells him that if he beats him for the rest of his life, he will earn her respect and call her oldest brother, which made him blush with excitement and tells him not to forget his words. If we sit down next while patiently waiting for his turn, he looks attentively the boss who is in Minotaur. A recurring monster when we talk about labyrinths, and now that he sees it in reality, it is true that it is extremely large, even more so than the ogre met before. However, he believes that a Minotaur is less dangerous than an ogre controls because in reality he moves with less intensity. He is therefore convinced that he can hunt it alone. While he keep moving forward, the Minotaur wakes up, which shows their difference colossal in size. Desiring to look into the monster's face when she thinks that she is supposed to win against this thing. But on the other hand, she has come this far. Now is not the time to back down. She then began to rush towards him brandishing his spear. The Minotaur tried to crush it with his hand, but she saw it at the last moment and managed to dodge it. Faced with shock, she manages to catch up before resuming the attack. She then tries to plant the creature's hand still on the ground, but she realizes that his skin is so hard that his spear cannot pierce her. And when she didn't expect it not, the Minotaur caught him with his other hand. She thought when it was the end of her. But against all odds, the Minotaur threw it back to the starting point. If she asks him why he finished the fight, throwing her instead of attacking her. From the time where we caught the winner and decided, if we sketch a smile saying it's now his turn, he tells her that he will show them how far their bronchi are not at the same level. So Eugene, looking at him, makes fun of him. If looking at him angry in his head, he treated him with all the ills, he thinks he can't beat a simple little cow. He then began to reveal magic all over his body before concentrating it directly into his sword. The result was that she was completely surrounded by blue light. Wanted to look at him, surprised. Whose sword is this? A blade that can cut anything. And to create it, you have to practice mana for at least 10 years. She then began to despair, telling oneself that the gap main and secondary branches is just way too important. I looked at him impressed. And know how to make a sword, which at his age is not bad. Unfortunately, he can't keep it up for a very long time, but it will be enough to beat this monster. But after a short time he surrenders, realizes that the aura of his sword has disappeared. Seeing this, he was very agitated and wonders how this is possible. Eugene thought back to Gillet's words during the meal, which said that he no longer wants discrimination between the branches. He thinks that the reason for coming from the inn and above all so that he makes sure that the boss cannot be beaten with magic, which therefore creates similar conditions for all branches. He still didn't understand why this was happening. However, he still had a lot of mana. Eugene looked at him smiling and told him that if he is afraid, he can come back. The fact that he and his sister looks at him saying that totally stopped him from giving up. It would be the shame of his life. He comes to his senses and tells himself that he is completely capable to beat this monster without mana. So he started to rush with his sword in his hand towards the direction of the imposing boss of the maze. As he rushes towards him, the Minotaur tries to catch it, but he manages to dodge his attacks while inflicting small cuts. He continues to weaken him little by little every time, but unfortunately, it is said that this type of attack won't make him fall. So he must aim for his legs. Instead, he started to rush towards his legs as soon as his new attack. Looks like it worked. He didn't notice anything, but when it was about to arrive down to his feet, he blocked his path at the last moment with his knee, and once caught, he throws it in the same direction than desire. Following the throws, he manages to catch his fall, but it looks like he lost, which made it deeply disappointed with the result. But on the other hand, he can't say anything. Eugene then looked at Seal and said to him that it is the following, but she told him that she must not fight. After all, she prefers to look at him instead. According to Eugene, it seems that she is smarter than her brother. So he headed towards his equipment. Once he wears them, he started moving towards the boss. So if she asks him if he can win, Eugene says he thinks that for him it's impossible to lose. Once in front of the boss, he looks at him calmly and wonders how he should go about. He uses his first attack, dodging to climb onto his arm. Little by little, the Minotaur tried to grab it with his other hand, but he jumped on his shoulder before arriving on his head. At the moment when he was going to be hit, he jumped at the last moment. In other words, the boss hit himself as he screams, opening big his mouth. Eugene seizes this moment of inattention before slicing at full speed without stopping the gorge of the Minotaur. This is a real surge which never stops. Others who don't watch it were speechless. Don't understand how he is capable to aim for such a precise bridge repeatedly. Finally, Eugene prepared himself and delivered a blow violent in the center of the wound. The green blood of the monster started to squirt from the spot, and Eugene only no longer has than to move away from the creature. The Minotaur fell directly to the ground, dead stiff. He shook his sword to remove the liquid, and from his expression, we can say that he had no trouble. He returns to them and asks them if they looked closely, if we didn't even know what to say seeing that. Eugene looked at him smiling. It looks like it's him who won the bet if we told him not to get on your high horse, if he had whose sword he could have. Well, maybe he could have killed him, but not with such ease. As I turned my back on him, he realized that her view of him had changed. His hatred seemed to have faded, and instead, he had nothing left but admiration. Equipment of Eugene suddenly began to disappear, as well as the rest of the dungeon. It seems like that the ceremony is over. While the two instructors get up. Gillet. He couldn't stop laughing of excitement. He looked at Diane and tells him it's absolutely incredible that a child of the secondary family who never trained his mana and then beat as a boss with such ease confirms a Minotaur is not easy to beat alone. That's why he insisted about being a team. He wanted him to try it all together, different methods, but it looks like it surpassed all monsters and all the traps alone. But who could he be? Gillet. He looks at him smiling. He explains that since he arrived here, Eugene has nothing does anything else besides work out. He also sent people in his hometown to investigate, and it seems like they all have the same speech. This child was born to fight. For him, the ceremony was a success. Find a treasure like him is priceless. But I ask him if it is not disturbed. After all, this child is much better than his. If the difference is already absolutely colossal, what will it become once he has mastered his mana? But I said that we should rejoice in it and it will make it shine brighter the name of Leonardo. So let's continue by asking him whether this opinion would be the same if he wishes to become the next heir, if he wishes to become the next head of the Leonardo family. Gillett looked at him without speaking. He says that the position of chief must be occupied by the largest. If his own child can't get it, then it comes back to him quite simply right. If they don't have the strength to defend the right given to them at birth, then they are not worthy to lead the family. She still apologized for having went overboard with his questions. He made what was around them disappear and told him that as a long-time friend, he will give him his opinion. He thinks he's better that he directly adopted Eugene Gillett. He looked at him, surprised by these words. And she tells us that if a child of the secondary line came to beat the principal, this could create great tensions within family, even bloodshed. Gillis and to thank him for his advice. It's all the same quite an interesting offer, but first, he wishes to congratulate them. When the children come back victorious over the labyrinth, most of them had an embarrassed look among the children. Some looked more dejected than others. Gilad looked at every one of them beginning with Yod, who couldn't even reach the center of the maze. This was because he was too much distracted by magic and monsters. But on the other hand, it was a place where he was supposed to prove himself. He could have restrained his curiosity compared to him. And if the children came out very well, they certainly did not beat the final boss, but it should improve quickly with a little practice. Gilad looked at the children and said to them that they all worked well. He looked at them all from here. He thought it would be much more difficult for them, but they emerged victorious. He then looked at Eugene. He told him he was the most remarkable of all children. Eugene thanks him. He tells her that his way to evade the traps and face monsters was absolutely impressive, especially the way he won against the final boss alone, without any injury. Gargoyle was surprised at his words. He looked at Eugene and wondered how was it possible with her wimpy body. If only he was in his family, he could have had better treatment. The inn will be honest and said he initially thought that he was going to stay more than 2 days, but it seems that he underestimated them all. Indeed, and even if they are young, they are descendants of the lineage Great Vermouth. Gilead tells them it's time to rest and he wants to organize a big banquet, but unfortunately, he couldn't have prepared it in advance. He didn't think he would finish immediately. While the inn brought the children back, Gilad called Eugene so that he comes with him if she had understood. She asks him if he will give her his present now. Gillett tells him that there's no reason to keep him waiting. If she was still jealous enough during all these years, all the time beg his father to go. But he never took her. All she could do, it was looking at Eugenie in her place. While the two walked calmly. He tells her that he is quite surprised because he is able to handle a large number of weapons, but Eugene told him that he doesn't deserve so many compliments. He tells her that he knows he also used a spear against Kian and mistakes besides the sword and the shield in the labyrinth. Eugene wondered how could he know about the fight with errors, but on the other hand, he is the head of the family, so it doesn't surprise him. Gillis and he tells him that the sword is the symbol of family. But the big glass foams could actually handle all types of weapons, hence its nickname the God of War, the Master of All. However, he was not the only one in this situation. His comrade Hamel was also a great master in this diversity, with only equal Great Vermouth. Eugene was a little embarrassed when he told him that in the stories, Hamel was called an idiot. Gillett laughed at these words. Indeed, he had also seen this story, but he finds that if he had not been there, the story would have been boring and being honest, he confesses to her that he preferred Hamel to the Great Vermouth, which left Eugene speechless. The only thing he could ask why, even if the big glass froths was an almost divine being, he still preferred Hamel's human qualities. This character allows the reader to easily identify with him. Indeed, we could directly feel his inferiority in the face of his rival, but he never gave up and always strived to surpass it. And finally, he ended up sacrificing himself for his friends. Eugene says to himself in his head, only for a history book like this one, it is obvious that this type of event be taken from it as moral teachings. But still, it doesn't hurt to be honest. So Eugene tells him that he also likes Hamel, which made the father smile. They end up arriving in front of a kind of tower guarded by 2 knights who open the door for them. Once inside, they find themselves in front of a staircase which goes underground. As he went down one to one the frozen steps of the said killer. The first person apart from being the head of the family to come here. So Eugene asks him if he is really allowed to go there. Obviously, he doesn't go back on his promises, and anyway, this has already been discussed with the elders. The elders are part of the Lionheart Senate. In other words, they are the former heads of the family with important former members' secondary lines. He asks her what the room contains, and Gillis. She answered him that these are heirlooms which have accumulated for hundreds of years. There is also the equipment of the Great Vermouth. Eugene asks if there is also the sacred sword that he carried. I told him that indeed. But he won't be able to see this one, given that she is the symbol of the Leonhardt family. After all, it cannot be held only by one person. Eugene was a little disappointed by his words and went on to tell him that there is also another reason. This sword must also be capable to recognize its bearer. Sir Vermont himself had said that she had refused all the people who wore it before. Eugene was curious faced with these words and vest. He tells her that he will understand once he is in front of him. He arrives in front of the giant entrance of a safe. Gilead bit his thumb so that blood can come out, and he uses it in order to activate the mechanism. This one fit turn the door circles until recreating the symbol of the family. Once accomplished, the door rises and Gillis and Luddy said come on. Eugene asks him what Gillette is going to do, and he replied that he preferred wait here. He doesn't want to influence his choice given that he will surely be worried about what he think. Eugene couldn't help but thank him for his consideration before heading towards the awards room. Once back in the room, Eugene really only wanted one thing. He stood before the sacred sword, who was completely surrounded by a magical aura originally. Says it's time to try. Eugene was going to lift the sacred sword. Its existence dates back to mythical times of the creation of the Holy Empire of Ura. She was for countless years in the central temple. He recognized that vermouth, as a carrier. 300 years ago this sword pierced the demon king of slaughter, even if after that, he mainly used it as a torch. Eugene gets ready to grab the sword while smiling, but it seems that she doesn't get up. The blade didn't move a millimeter. In any case, even if he succeeds, he won't be able to take her with him, then he should look for something else. Walking among weapons, he recognizes a sword named Aspect, the Blade of Gluttony. It is a sword capable of consuming mana that she cuts in order to transform it in its own power. In other words, it can remove large sorrows alone, but Eugene tells himself that the reason for which he could use it correctly, and because he was an excellent mage, he says that in reality it is too complex to be used in its current state. Apart from this one, there are others who are familiar to him: the Lance Draconis, a Corvus capable of expelling flames that rivals a dragon, the Bow Thunder, Father Noah who brings down lightning at any distance. The Blade of the Hurricane, one was blessed by the elemental spirit of the Hero of the Wind, the Flying Sword Illusory who can become crazy and infusing it with mana. And finally the Shield of Geddon who can sweep all attacks received in a vacuum. They are so extraordinary that he regrets to only be able to take one. But is that all? He does not see Moonlight Sword, nor the Demon Spear. It's true that it's still been 300 years, but he can't help but think that they did on purpose to remove some of them. It is said that among these choices, the Hurricane Blade is the most obvious. Just by brandishing it, we can summon spirits, wind, and even the elemental hero with enough mana. He still continues to think but ends up telling himself that he can look for something else than a weapon. Other locations contain a multitude of artifacts such as gems and accessories, but something catches his eye. This necklace was familiar to him. This is the one he wore as a Mel. In the past, it belonged to his parents. Eaten by monsters, he managed to avenge them later in her life and carried her until his last breath. He was wondering what could it do here and says that Vermouth probably brought his body home. He guesses they don't have it either, abandoned in the dungeon. The promise made between Moss Green is the Demon King of Seclusion led to peace. But the realm of demons, Helmet, still exists and still exists. He remembered those past moments with his comrades. He wanted to kill the demons between the 5 of them. But what kind of broken promise? Especially towards Moose. What could he possibly be thinking? But Eugene says to himself that it might be because of him. Maybe he lacked power, because he died halfway. He doesn't want to blame his comrades. He must surely have a good reason to act like this. There are a multitude of objects that he would like to have in this room, but he doesn't want this necklace stay here. When he came out, he was stunned. Is this really what he chose? But Eugene says he likes it. Gillett asks him if he is sure of himself. There should be treasures incredible. Yet, he asks her to show him the necklace. It is not a precious stone, nor of great craftsmanship, it's just a cheap necklace. He even wonders why it was in the vault. He places it above the mechanism, which reacts with a red light. It's weird, he's not even saved in the trunk. Gillett says it's not a treasure Leonardo and he shouldn't be in there. But Eugene says he was there anyway. Gillett tells him that he doesn't really know value. If he sells it, he couldn't even buy a sword. So he asks if it's really what he wants. Eugene answers yes, smiling. Gillett, he says to himself that if that's what he wishes, then there is nothing he can do about it. But he even asked at the inn to evaluate it because this object is unknown. Maybe he's enchanted. Eugene asks if he will be able to see her. Once this is done, Gillett. He promises her yes. He says he didn't expect that and it's not technically one of the treasures. Then he can go back into the room to take one more. Eugene asks, stunned, if that's really the case. He says yes, because it was anyway the initial promise. He thanks him immediately before to run towards the inside of the room. He can't believe that this guy, so kind, be the descendant of this moron Moss Green. In this case. Without hesitation, he grabbed the blade of the hurricane nicknamed Winnie. He removes his sheath, which reveals blue energy emanating from the blade. Once evening falls and asks him why he didn't take a spear. However, he is super strong with it. Eugene says that it is he who chooses, and then anyway, he is also good with a sword. Gargoyle thinks he finds her too light with her strength. He should have taken a good hammer or an axe, but Eugene says again that it is he who chooses. He then contracts his muscles, saying to him that he can visit his family if he wants to improve his growth. But Eugene responds that he doesn't need it. Desire told him to ignore that pile of muscles and draw the sword. Eugene looks at her without saying a word and did so. She asks him what her name is. It's about Winnie. It will allow him to call the king of. After improving, she tells him that she is really good, but she would still have taken a lance. Eugene says there were a lot of them. If she is curious, then Desira asks him if he saw the dragon spear Carbo, whose each push causes a dragon's breath, but he pretends not to know what does she look like. So she asks him if he saw the demon spear. Rune kills the best weapon in the arsenal of the great moss worm. Gargoyle thinks he heard about it. It is used by the big demon Brutality, but Desiree tells him that she didn't ring the bell. These words made Eugene think, the demon king of Brutality. 300 years ago, 5 demon king ruled the kingdom of Helmet, the demon king of the apocalypse, the demon king of seclusion, the demon king frenzy, the demon king of brutality, and finally the demon king of slaughter. Mechanic tells her she is wrong. Vermit's best weapon, it was the gigolo destroying hammer. But errors retort that the king, demon brutality, was stronger than that of the massacre. Gary responds that the power of an enemy does not determine that of the weapon that he wears. As they continue to argue, and Eugene realizes that he didn't have saw that hammer in the room either. Among all weapons used by Moosh, alone these two belong to the demon king. They are probably too problematic to be kept in the vault. They had to put them somewhere else. They still continue to argue to find out which one was the strongest. They are too childish for him. These two weapons were very powerful and it is too difficult to compare them. But if anyone should ask him what was the weapon the strongest of Vermolo, Eugene would respond without hesitation it wasn't the sacred sword, but the sword of moonlight, a sword that was sealed deep in demon territory as he brandished the blade of the hurricane. Eugene smiles and says to himself that it is the first true sword that he will hold in this life. He began to move with what attracted the attention of the other two. At first he made simple gestures before chaining movements with elegance and perfect precision, without putting its power into it. He continues his series of sequences quickly in front of the gazes of gargoyles. It is Desired totally amazed by his mastery. At the same time, in Gillett's office, the innkeeper was evaluating the collar that Eugene took. He opens his eyes then puts it on the table. According to him, there is no magic in this object. Was he really in the vault? Gilad then nods. The magician asks him if he is sure that he wasn't fooled by this child. He answers her that he had no reason to do that. If he hadn't allowed her to take something else, then he would have voluntarily found himself without anything. It's true that it was a choice risky for him, and what's more, he had nothing to gain. So he said to himself that it would be good to verify the origins of the object. Gillett asks him how he plans to do it, and the innkeeper tells him that there is magic created by Sienna who can read mana memory. As mana is found everywhere, there is always a little in an object, even if he is not enchanted. So Gillett lets him do it. He tries to retrace his journey, but it looks like there isn't much information. He thinks that 100 years ago, it was bought from a merchant in the capital. It seems like he can't see more. The magic present in the treasury must have interfered with the memory of his mana Gillet, and he thinks there's probably more of living people to confirm the source. She asks him what he plans to do with it. And Gillet tells him that he plans to give it to Eugene, given that he was ready to sacrifice treasures to have it. His friend told him that he became attached to this child, and Gillet smiled before getting up. He watches Eugene train and says there's no reason not to like it. He also has a suggestion for him. Eggplant, think you know what it is. He had just seen Gillet. He will take Eugene Leonard as his own child. The next day, we salute Eugene. Nina was intimidated and Eugene was examining her. He is the younger brother of Gillet, the head of the family, a weird guy who never married, accompanied his brother on his journey. Eugene introduces himself Jay. They say he obviously knows his name. He is the youngster of the secondary branch who beat everyone during the ceremony. Eugene asks him if he came looking for something. Ji-young nods. His brother wanted to send another knight, but he insisted on coming. He wants to see the young talent for himself. He heard a lot of things, but he was unable to attend the ceremony. By tradition, only the head of the family has the right to attend, even if the windfall is an exception for help that he brings. He adds that he doesn't take it badly. He has no bad intentions towards his brother or his family. But the more he talks like that, the less that makes sense. Eugene says it doesn't matter, and he replies that his brother would probably say the same thing. Looks like this guy is free like air. That's probably why that he is not yet married. He starts walking and Eugene asks why we want to see it. We answer that it is surely to congratulate him, but he says it's already been done before asking if suddenly he doesn't know either. They say he might have an idea why he was summoned, but he thinks he shouldn't be interested in his private stories. However, he turns around and says he hopes be able to talk to him a little more often in the future. Eugene says he does too. Before knocking on the door, a voice tells him to come in and we open the door, blinking to encourage him. Even if it's nice, it's still a little too invasive for Eugene. When he enters the room, Gillet, he was waiting for it. He apologizes for calling him too suddenly and told him to sit down. Once around the table, he places the necklace to be examined. It's just an ordinary object. Eugene is not surprised, and Gillet adds that nothing special was not found by searching in the memory of the object's mansion. Eugene remembers this technique. It was a sienna spell. He asks what kind of memory was there. I said this necklace was purchased in the streets of the capital about 100 years ago. Eugene tells himself that this is not possible. He is convinced that he wore it about 300 years ago. For several decades, it is impossible that he confuses it with something else. He also thinks that opera has no reason to lie. Maybe he made a mistake using the spell, but Eugene tells himself that instead, he should look for a spell can deceive. The head of the magic tower exists. Our protagonist was immersed in his thoughts. He didn't know the reason, but despite everything, he asks if he can see her. Gilad nods. If he wants it, he can keep it without problem. Eugene thanks him and places it around his neck. His interlocutor says that he also has it called for another reason. He tells her it could appear suddenly, but the offer is certainly not bad and could greatly influence its future. Eugene thinks he has understood Gillet. He begins to express himself, but our protagonist stops him. Even though she is nice and cute, he has no intention of getting married for the moment. It all makes sense. She has JC very nice in front of him while he humiliated his brother. Eugene thought that Gilad was a good person, but so that he planned something like this, he says he's too young for that, and the father stops him. It looks like there's a misunderstanding. They're not trying to marry him off. Eugene remained motionless a second before blushing with shame. He made the worst assumption, and now he wants to hit himself to imagine such a scenario. Despite their mental age difference, he says to himself that having become a child again must have corrupted his brain. Then he asks the real reason. I said he wants to adopt her. Which also makes Eugene react. This is an equally surprising reason. It's true that becoming connected to the branch main is not a bad idea. He tells her that he didn't expect such news. Gillet tells him that it is not as far-fetched as an arranged marriage. Then Eugene apologizes, quite embarrassed. He adds that he can also make his father to be transferred to the branch main if he wishes. Eugene told him that he would then have 2 fathers. Gilad responds that he doesn't have to make it complicated. He just wants to bring it to the branch main. He already has 3 children. He doesn't want to steal Gerard's. He never met him, but he swears to protect his father just like his brothers. Eugene looks at him, a little confused. He asks her if her father would lose his respect if he refuses to be adopted. Gilad smiles and says that this is obviously not the case. He wakes up and says it's a bit embarrassing to say it like that, but he's not that immature. If he refuses, it would be regrettable, but that's all. The father respects his decision and hopes for the best for his future. Eugene says he can't decide that all alone. He needs to know what his father think about it. I said they will decide a little later. He will send a troop to bring his father here. Eugene reflects on what was said and asks how this is better for his future. What did he mean by that? If it grows in the main branch, it will have many advantages. First, he could learn with great knights which are located here. Eugene says he would like to learn from Stronger that he becomes her adopted son. Can't will he learn from his new father? Gillet looks at him, surprised. Eugene is curious to know his power. He smiles and tells her he could obviously teach him. But someone stronger than him is located here, at the origin of the world. Who could it be? This is Gideon, which ended up surpassing it over time. Our protagonist didn't expect it. He asks if his father taught him how mana works, even if he couldn't use it. Eugene said he didn't want still learn it before coming here. He was afraid that learning the process, he would have started to train his mana unconsciously. It's true that he constantly does efforts to progress. By defeating high-level monsters, it is possible to obtain mana crystals. They can be used for learning, but the more powerful they are, the more expensive and complicated they are gain. Furthermore, in order to progress correctly, you also need the help of a teacher very experienced. All these conditions are very complicated to put together in the Guard family. Its original environment really isn't good enough to make his talent flourish. But on the other hand, he can't say that. He doesn't want Jean to finish by hating his own family. This needs to be discussed between him and his father. Now that they're done complicated subjects, I would like to continue to speak with Eugene to find out more about this mysterious boy. Eugene says he agrees, smiling. He speaks quietly for a few hours while eating what was on the table. Once that he had nothing more to say to himself. Eugene says he is going now go there, and Gillet says to him that he can wait a little longer if he wants someone to accompany him. Eugene says it's not worth it. To come back where it comes from won't be very long. He considers this like a little walk. While he quietly retraced his steps, a fragrance attracts his attention. It's the smell of perfume. As he continues to move forward, he realizes that this person was not moving. She may even be waiting for him once he arrives right next to it. Someone was indeed there. This was the second wife, Annie. There is. When she sees him, she pretends to be surprised. Eugene knows that she is overplaying, that she had been waiting for him all along, but he decides to play his game. He pretends to be surprised too. So he greets her while introducing herself to Annie. He tells him that she heard the news of the fact that he was discussing privately with her husband. Eugene asks him if she needs something to define, says he is going up on his high horse. His arrogance knows no bounds, but on the other hand, it's not surprising. He completely crushed the main family during the succession ceremony. This child will have dizzying growth in the future, so instead of an enemy it would be better to make it a major ally. She says to herself that organizing a wedding arranged with her would be a good idea. This is also why that she placed it near him. He tells her she's curious of what they talked about in private. Eugene says he doesn't think that he should disclose this information. He makes up for it by telling her that he is right and that this is not an interrogation. She then adds that she has something else to say to him to look at her with a curious look. She asks him if he remembers how much he was disrespected. She says because of the ceremony many other things, she didn't have time to come apologize personally. Eugene says it's not worth it. This incident has already been resolved since a long time. She tells him that he is very mature for his age and that she is happy that he thinks so. She firmly scolded Kian for that and she hopes he ends up alive in the future. Eugene tells him that this will obviously be the case. After all, they share the same last name. At these words, there were dark thoughts. He's not wrong when he talks about family, but coming from the mouth of this child, it gives him a weird feeling. Eugene asks him then if he can now go. Tells him yes, and she apologizes for wasting his time. He should now rest. He then continued quietly on his way. So when it comes to examining it, Eugene says to himself that this woman was openly against him when he arrived at the beginning as a secondary family, and now that he can see his character in real life, he would prefer not to get involved in these stories.